Hey, thanks so much for checking out the Nikhil Hogan Show. The show is available for free on multiple platforms such as most major podcast platforms, Facebook, and YouTube. If you enjoy the content, please subscribe for the latest episodes, and please like and share the content with others. Also, please check out nikhilhogan.com for updates on my upcoming book, Why Children Quit Music, and resources for more interesting music topics. Now, let's get to the show. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Nikhil Hogan Show. Our mission is to talk to the best musicians in the world and talk to them just about music. What a delight to welcome back onto the show for the second time the great saxophonist and composer, Dr. Charles McPherson. An incredibly prolific artist with a career spanning decades, McPherson has performed in over 70 recordings, both as a leader and sideman, with practically all of the greatest names in jazz. Most recently, McPherson was honored for his 80th birthday and played at a special double concert, McCoy, Tyner, and Charles McPherson at 80 at Jazz at Lincoln Center with Wynton Marsalis on April 5th and 6th of this year. He also appeared at the Kennedy Center honoring his lifelong friend Stanley Crouch at the NEA Jazz Masters Tribute Concert. The resident composer for the San Diego Ballet, McPherson premiered his new ballet, Song of Songs, for this season. Dr. McPherson, welcome back to the show. I'm so thrilled.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me, and good to be back. Thank you.
Well, let's start off with your wonderful concert at the Jazz at Lincoln Center. They played some great arrangements of the tunes, Jumping Jacks, Marionette, Horizons, Nightfall, Seventh Dimension. How did the songs get chosen?
Well, I chose them and talked to the musical director, Sherman Irby, who's the musical director for the band, and also the lead alto player. And we did talk about tunes, and we both agreed on this. They wanted to do material that had been recorded before, and so we just agreed upon a few tunes to do. And the way that worked out, everybody in the Lincoln Center big band also, besides playing and being really marvelous musicians, also orchestrate and arrange as well. That's part of the prerequisite to even be in that band. So,
and how did you choose those tunes?
Well, I chose them just because, I like them, and also we did discuss out of many tunes which ones they liked, or which one Sherman liked, and of course I like most of my tunes. I like them, but we just agreed upon, because I have I do have some material, but we can't do all of them. So they were just selected because we both agreed upon, okay, this is good to do. And also tunes that were recorded, and that's how we selected it.
That's wonderful. And so the music director, Sherman Irby, at the concert, he said this: there is only one Bird, one Stitt, one Cannonball, and one Charles McPherson. That's. I mean, I think that's pretty appropriate. Now, let's talk a little bit. We talked about Bird in the last interview quite a bit. There's two other names there, and I think, for a younger audience, people listening, these are important people, right, in history, especially in music. So let's talk about Sonny Stitt, for instance. And did you know him? Did you listen to him? Yeah,
I met Sonny Stitt. I had occasion to meet him and be on the same show that he was on, and I played with him. I never worked in the same band he worked in, but I've had occasion to be on the same show with him, so I've been around him a few times. As a youngster, I did. He was one of the guys that I did listen to. I listened to many people, but he was one of them.
Can I ask you this question? That they said that Sonny Stitt was an imitator of Charlie Parker, some people say. Could you comment on his influence on saxophone playing and what differentiates him from Charlie Parker, perhaps?
Yeah, well, I think they give him, I think that's a little bit unfair to categorize Sonny Stitt as merely an imitator. Sonny Stitt is just one of the many, 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 many saxophone players who were influenced by Charlie Parker when they first heard Charlie Parker. He's 4 years younger than Charlie Parker. He's basically in the same generation. When Charlie Parker first emerged, on record and people are hearing him, he completely, he was so compelling and so, such a great saxophone player and musician, that his style, it was so informative and so much it was just so right in many ways that everybody that's a certain age, people near Charlie Parker's age and a little younger, became totally just flabbergasted by Charlie Parker.
I heard he was quite combative on the bandstand, and he was a
he was competitive.
He was competitive. Could you talk about that competition that maybe saxophone players had?
He was very competitive. Now he was like a gunslinger, Yeah, so he was competitive, and if you hadn't done your homework, you're going to get really
cut up.
You're going to look like he's just going to beat the hell out of you. So he did that. Most of the time he would. There were some people he'd run up against. It's like, okay, so this is not what you thought it was going to be. But quite often, because his technique was just
sensational.
Sensational technique. Boy, if anybody had the technique close to Bird, it would certainly be him. He might have been equal to Bird in terms of technique, or if not equal, really close, about as close as you could get. So he really could play the horn well as a saxophonist, and he was very fluent. He was his musical lines and ideas really flowed, and he was just pristine in his execution of his ideas. So all he did was take the language of Charlie Parker, like everybody else did, and just found a way to kind of find his own way by being influenced by Charlie Parker. But so did Sonny Rollins, so did John Coltrane, so did everybody else, so did Clifford Brown, so did Kenny Dorham. You know what I mean? All these people, so did Bud Powell. All these people heard Charlie Parker, and they became, right away, he was very influential. So every saxophone player, from the mid-'40s and late '40s and early '50s are heavily influenced by Charlie Parker. Sonny Stitt sort of gets, maybe because he was early on, because he kind of learned how to navigate through those kind of waters pretty early on. But some of the stories that I hear was that even people like John Coltrane, these people were alto players. Jimmy Heath was an alto player. John Coltrane was an alto player. Well, when they heard Charlie Parker, they were doing exactly what Sonny Stitt. They were listening to every lick, every note he played, and because that's how compelling Charlie Parker was. And when they heard Dexter Gordon was like one of the first bebop tenor players who translated Charlie Parker's style to the tenor saxophone. So Jimmy Heath told me that when he and John Coltrane, both of whom are from Philly, when they heard Dexter and that bebop style being played on tenor, they both looked at each other and said, wow, this kind of playing sounds great on tenor also. And they immediately said, okay, I'm not going to play alto anymore and be compared to Charlie Parker and have to deal with him. I'm going to play tenor. And they did. So a lot of people switched horns because of Charlie Parker, but they still played like him. So Sonny Stitt is no more guilty of that than anybody else, really.
You've played at the highest level for decades. Could you talk about some of the battles that maybe you've had on the bandstand? Could you recall any encounters where you're just getting into a cutting contest with another player?
Well, that occurs sometimes, that because but listen, I must say this to you: the best players in the world normally don't necessarily, they try not to think that way. And it's nothing to do with morality. It's got more to do with to get the best out of yourself and to play at your best. The mental attitude of competition doesn't necessarily bring about the best playing. In fact, quite often it's an impediment, maybe.
Yeah. But that being said, has that happened, and have you got into some gunslinging duels?
I've been on the bandstand yes, I've been where I could tell that some player is very much aware of trying to engage me.
Yeah. Does that change your thought process in that moment?
Well, I try not to get in that space. I try not to. I don't know if I always, because sometimes I can feel myself, if the guy is really trying to do that, then sometimes instead of me just not engaging in that at all, just keep concentrating on my own musical ideas and flows, sometimes I have found myself that I become seduced into, oh, so you want to go that way, huh?
Yep.
Okay, let's do it, And so, yeah, I've done that occasionally. But that, as I said before, that's not necessarily the way to get the best out of it. The best way to play is where you're not even, there's no who would you call it, narcissism at all. And you just keep on your ideas. And then and you end up, if you are a better player than that person, it ends up showing itself more that way than it would be if you're trying to like tit for tat with them. But yes, I've had that happen, and I've been engaged in it myself. Yes.
I used to read about these piano duels that Beethoven would have, and Mozart would have, and Clementi would have, and it strikes me that bebop, in some ways, really reminds me of classical musicians 200 years ago when they used to improvise, and they would almost have this sort of dynamic going on.
Yes, yeah, that's true. That's what I read. I hear this. So it's probably, I'm sure that these guys could and really, like Bach could just do this. Bach could, do, just right on the spot, make fugues up and just play all that harmony, all those moving parts.
Within bebop, were you guys aware? I mean, you have such fabulous technique. Were you aware of classical technique? I do know you studied with a classical saxophonist. Is that correct?
I did study in Detroit at a music studio called Larry Teal's. Now, Larry Teal was a classical saxophonist and oboist, and he had probably the best studio at that time during the 50s, middle to late 50s in Detroit. And I studied with one of the teachers at that school. And not long, maybe a year or so, but I learned a lot. I mean, I've had some study with the classical saxophone.
Are you a good sight reader, Dr. McPherson?
I'm decent. I'm okay. There are people that the best sight readers are people who do that all the time, and that's when they engage in music. They're doing that more than anything else. I can hold my own.
You are more of an ear player, would you say?
I think I'm both, because I do know. I mean, I have knowledge, at least harmonic knowledge. I do understand harmony, and I do know why certain things sound a certain way, and I understand theory and that, and I also can hear it. So I would say both. You said something really astonishing in the last interview. You said, I can sing pretty much everything I play. How did you develop that ability to sing difficult lines? And also, since the horn, you're playing it, are you singing them internally? Are you thinking of the lines? Yes. I mean, ideally, you want the horn, since you're playing a horn, you want that to be an extension of your voice. So, the production of a sound by way of your voice is done with your larynx, in your throat there. So, ideally, if I'm playing a note on the saxophone that's C, for instance, then it's best for me to be thinking of C in my mind, and also for my throat and larynx to be producing a C as if I were singing the C. So so basically, you mean that there's one word I could use to describe that process, and then you should be, as an improviser and playing an instrument other than your own singing voice, you should be able to internalize every note that you play, and you should be able to externalize it. Every note that you're able to sing, that you're able to play externally. Externally, you should be able to do that. Now everybody doesn't do that. It's possible that, for instance, for a saxophone player to be fingering the right fingering to get the note C, and they don't have to be thinking C. If they finger it, they're going to get C. But it's better if you're thinking it and fingering it. It's just the C is more organic, and it's more coming from that zone, that magic zone. So yes, you should be able to, and the way you practice that is you actually practice singing. I mean, you sing songs, or you sing intervals, and then match it to the horn. I play saxophone, I play alto. So sometimes when I practice, I have a little exercise I do where I will sing a note. I will just say, ah, and then I will say, okay, let me play that note on my horn, and then see if I can match that note. Now, quite often, you will be not spot on. You might be a half step off. But the more you do it, the more that you're able to do it every time. And that's what you want to do. If I'm going to say da, 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 I should be able to take the horn up and do exactly that, in that key, right in that pitch, da, 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 and do the right fingering to get that and hear it. So that's what I mean by internalizing. So one should do that.
We never got a chance to talk much about your friend Lonnie Hilyer. And when people think of jazz trumpet, they might think of Dizzy Gillespie, Louis Armstrong, Clifford Brown. But you mentioned that he was very, very talented, and you knew him. He was your best friend. Could you talk about Lonnie and how good he was?
Yeah, well, Lonnie was extremely good. He was a little, just 6 months younger than I. So we're the same generation. From Detroit, we lived on the same street. We played together when we were kids. Before we played music, we just played as little boys, We both got interested in music around the same time. We both sort of studied with Barry, at the same time. And so now, Lonnie, as a talent, was extremely, let me see, how do you say it? Extremely harmonically in terms of all of the elements of music. He was extremely talented in terms of harmony and his hearing ability. He had beautiful ears. He had a very extremely strong harmonic concept that he was able to utilize.
How did he build up his harmonic concept?
Well, I think a lot of it was natural. I think, some of the stuff you come into the world wired a certain way. And some stuff you just get from, some of it is nature, some of it is nurture.
Did he play piano?
His stuff, yes, he played piano. So he was a guy that played piano, and he had marvelous ears also. So he was knowledgeable in terms of left brain, and he was also talented in terms of right brain. He knew, in terms of what it was, in an analytical way, but he also had this other brain functionality where his intuition was just wonderful. And he had almost perfect pitch, probably. He was great. He was wonderful. And so his linear ideas, his musical phrases that he played, and how he connected them in a linear way was just spot on, just beautiful.
Who are his trumpet heroes?
His trumpet heroes would be certainly Dizzy Gillespie, but also that you might expect, but also Thad Jones that you might not expect. Thad Jones, he was influenced by Thad Jones. Now, Thad Jones is a fellow Detroiter. And Thad Jones is a great trumpet player. People do not really. He's very underestimated. He's one of the great trumpet players, and he's just a great writer and composer. He's just spectacular. But as a soloist, he's wonderful. Lonnie was influenced by him a lot.
And you guys joined Mingus around the same time, right? When you were 19 or 20 years old.
Yeah, we joined at the same time. We were like 20, 21, really young. Probably 1959, 1960. And we both got in Mingus's band because Yusuf Lateef, great tenor player from Detroit, told Mingus that there was a young trumpet player and a young alto player who were in town in New York and that were from Detroit that he knew. And if you needed an alto player, trumpet player, these are some young people that might be able to play your music. So go get a chance to hear them if you can. So Mingus came to a jam session one afternoon, and we were playing, Lonnie and myself, and he liked us and he hired us, and we went to play with him.
Were you nervous, evening. Dr. McPherson, knowing that?
Oh yeah. I was nervous, because Mingus was already he was an established person in the music world. He was a great bass player, and he had that reputation for being confrontational and quite difficult. So I knew all of this. So
you were aware that he had played repeatedly with Charlie Parker and.
Oh yeah. I was much aware of. We were both, Lonnie and I, were aware of Mingus and his reputation, musically and otherwise. So we were nervous.
There is a terrifying story you've shared before where he was not paid on time at a club, and he proceeded to, with his bare hands, rip apart piano strings on the grand piano.
Right, that was the first gig I had with him, and that's what he did that night. Yeah,
that's the first gig.
So I mean, he was quite the person. He was bigger than life, personality-wise. But he was a great musician, great composer.
Well, how did you feel knowing that he's played with Charlie Parker? I mean, one of the best of all time. And then you're a young guy. You're 19, 20 years old. Did you feel the pressure, like I've got to play as good as Bird to be in this band?
Well, I didn't necessarily think that. I didn't think of Bird as much as I thought I got to play and satisfy Mingus, who was not Charlie Parker. He had a different way of thinking and he had a different playbook than Charlie Parker. So I wasn't really referencing Charlie Parker so much with him. I was more concerned. I was more concerned about trying to be satisfactory. Be satisfactory to him musically, and that was hard enough. Just to do that.
When did you really feel confident about your abilities? What age?
Oh, well, let me see. I would say I started with Mingus, say 1960. I would say 60, late 60, like 67. Like middle 60s on. I started to feel. Yeah, I would say, I guess, more confident. So I would say from 25 on.
Yeah. Did that tenure supercharge your development?
Well, it certainly was compelling, and it certainly
because he fires everyone. I think he's very tough, right, on the band, from what I've read.
Yeah, he was very tough.
But he kept you because you were great.
The thing is that, I tried to play his music. I tried to be I tried to make him be pleased.
Would he ask you like suggestions and I think you should play like this, or was he very hands-on, or did he leave you alone to develop?
No. Well, when it came to interpreting his tunes, his melodies, he would suggest certain things if he wanted certain nuance. If he wanted certain things, he would say, bend this note more, or make this note louder, make it softer, or clean this up, or don't make this is too clean, you know. He had an interesting concept. He liked what he called organized chaos, which seems to be a dichotomy of terms in a way, but he liked things to sound like you are improvising, you are taking chances. So, but he didn't want things to sound too clean and pristine. Rough edges were okay with him, but not too rough, not too disorganized, because then he says, well, this is not organized enough. So it's some kind of middle ground that he liked, the feeling of spontaneity, which means that things might not be as pristine, but he liked the sense of organization as well, so it didn't sound like total, complete chaos or no organization. So he liked this in between.
When you were a younger man, I mean, obviously you've mentioned Charlie Parker as an influence, but did you know the lineage of all the players like Chu Berry, Earl Bostic, all the older saxophone players, Coleman Hawkins?
I knew some. Yeah, I knew some of them. But I knew all of them. I knew who they were, but I did not dedicate as much time as I wish I had to some of them. I would now and have since done that. But as a young player in my early 20s, yes, I knew who Earl Bostic was. I had listened to her. Actually, I had listened to Earl Bostic. But I wish I had listened more to Chu Berry. I wish I had listened more to people like Tab Smith or Pete Johnson. I knew who they were, or people like John Hodges. I had listened to them to some extent. But I think had I listened more, I would be better now. And I have since then gone back, and because now you have the modern age where you can go online and get YouTube, and you can get performances and hear records that people did in 1935.
Yes.
You know? And I have done that. I've made a point to listen to some of these old swing players.
And who really is special that people should know from your going back?
Oh, well, definitely Chu Berry, and most definitely Lester Young. Because Lester Young basically is the first Charlie Parker. Lester Young. No Lester Young, you'd have no Charlie Parker. No Lester Young, you wouldn't have Al Cohn, you wouldn't have Stan Getz, you wouldn't have Dexter Gordon, you wouldn't have Wardell Gray, you wouldn't have Charlie Parker, you wouldn't have John Coltrane, you wouldn't have a bunch of people if there were no Lester Young, because basically Lester Young is the swing player that basically the young people who were a little younger than Lester, like Charlie Parker, became very much influenced by Lester Young. How people became influenced by Charlie Parker, Lester Young was that iconic figure. And he's the one who, his rhythmic phrasing and his particular sensitivities really is the precursor to bebop and Charlie Parker. Because Charlie Parker lived in Kansas City, saw Lester Young every night, learned every note that Lester Young played, copied every note that Lester Young played, and learned it on saxophone, and just translated that style and that language from tenor to alto, and then imposed his own personality on that language. Pretty much like what I'm trying to do with Charlie Parker's language, and what Train tried to do with Charlie Parker's language.
You know, modern jazz education is quite a bit different from the way you learned. And, you know, people say that, oh, you know, now we have all these aids and resources. But in some ways, it's almost a detriment to learning, because maybe it's better the way you learned, which was more natural, more organic, more driven by the sound. Do you think there's some downsides?
There's some truth to that.
Is there a downside to this, you know, this commercialization of jazz education, which I think maybe some of it is actually quite wrong, actually, in the way they teach?
Yeah, no, I do understand. Well, just like anything else, there's ups and there's downs. There's positive and then there's negatives. So if you deal with it, if you just say, well, let's look at the negative thing, or what could be a negative. The day's education, if not careful, it can be a mechanism that basically churns out, mass produces a bunch of young players that all sound alike.
And isn't that true that when you were playing, when you were young, saxophone players really had individual voices?
Well, it was more because you
had to figure it out yourself.
There's more of a chance for that to happen because you don't have the technology today. Yesterday. Then those days that you do now. There's no such thing as YouTube being able to slow down a saxophone solo, for instance. You had to slow down a record player if you wanted to transcribe some solo, and it's going to be in a different key. It's not going to be in the right key. You had to actually, there were no books written with Charlie Parker solos where you could go to the book and read the solos and learn them. You had to learn them off of a record.
Some of the theory is a bit questionable. I remember when I was in school, they were telling me that, Charlie Parker used a Dorian here, he used a Mixolydian there, he used this mode and that mode. Would you say that he was thinking in modes?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know how he was thinking, but he was doing what it is. What he called it or what he thought of it is. I don't even know. I don't know how to answer that. All I do know is that he was playing the harmonic. I hear things. Well, that's a harmonic minor scale. Oh, this is a Dorian minor here. This is a diminished chord. This is augmenting. He's doing all of the harmonic devices.
Is it important how we name these concepts, Dr. McPherson?
I don't know if that's important. The point is that the functionality of them, how they work and how to use them, theoretically, he's doing all that just perfectly. So, it's like a guy doing, let's put it this way. If you hear, what is your native tongue?
English.
Okay, English. Yeah, you have an accent, though. Where
were you? Singapore used to be a British colony.
Okay, well, then I can hear other influences. I can hear that in your voice. Okay, well, let's speak. So English is your language. It's possible for a guy to speak perfect English, meaning that the grammar is just perfect. Everything about his verbs, how his nouns, how he's using adjectives, adverbs, prepositional phrases is spot on. He's doing perfect grammar and is speaking perfectly. There are people, now one is capable of doing that and might not know what to call things. So okay. And then there are people who speak perfect English who know what to call everything. They will say, this is an adjective phrase, this is an adverb. They know how to do all that. They know what to call it. But there are people who speak perfectly and might not even know what to call it, don't even think or care what it's called, but they're doing it perfectly. And, of course, there are people who are not doing it perfectly and who don't know what to call it. Well, Charlie Parker is a person that grammatically is doing everything perfectly, and the functionality of the sentence, paragraph, and everything he's doing is spot on, just perfect. Now, whether he called it this, I don't know, but I know he's speaking it. And that was the thing that was so compelling when people heard it, because it was so perfect.
I'm interested in our last conversation, we talked about jazz kind of watering down a little bit in some ways from the heady heights of bebop. Did jazz change over the last couple of decades since bebop, as more commercial music came in? Did we have to water it down a bit to try and reach out to people?
Well, yeah, I think that has happened. I think people who have done this are very conscious of trying to expand the audience, trying to make the music more likable to more people. So, yeah, that has been done. And I can't say that in itself, the wanting to do this, I can't say that that's an evil deed. I don't feel comfortable saying that because it's not necessarily in itself. To want to be able to have the music or your music or whatever shared by more people is not wrong in itself. I just think that if you're doing that, and everybody kind of wants their music to be liked by people, and if the more people that like what you're doing, that's good. I just think that you're still supposed to have a high level of craftsmanship, and that you find a way to do that and still don't dummy down, still keep a certain high level of idealism, that's your own personal idealism. Now, that might be a hard thing to do. I don't know, but I mean, for me, I would try to do that. And there's a way to do it. For instance, when I get ready to approach a composition, and then that kind of leads into the ballet music. When I get ready to conceive a melody, I'm very much aware that I have the choice to be as complex as as possible, or as simple as possible, and everything in between. I realize I have that choice. So on a conscious level, if I want to go have the concept of I want the melody to be simple, then I deliberately might have the harmony be complex. So that means the melody note might be not a lot of notes, but notes that are held. And the movement underneath that melody might be a bunch of things going on harmonically, but the melody note itself, or the melody, might be very simple and very singable. Okay, that's one way of thinking. Another way of thinking is have the melody very complex, meaning very notey, a lot of notes, a lot of moving parts, and have the harmony be more like one note that's held, or the harmony is not moving as fast. So you got these different ways to think. So if I want to reach an audience, for instance, and I want to reach a bigger audience, I know that being real complex, at least melodically,
doesn't always work.
Yeah, I'm going to lose them. So what I do is try to be as melodic and have a melodic something that's very catchy, and then if I'm going to use complexity so I can satisfy my artistic needs, I will have something else. I'll have complexity somewhere else that will be camouflage. The person won't even know I'm doing it.
Song of Songs are 8 new compositions written for the new San Diego Ballet season. Now, being the father of a professional ballerina, you must have heard all the music that she grew up dancing to, right?
Yes, I have heard. And I've heard Prokofiev, Stravinsky, and all of the classical music that that ballet is connected with. I've heard a lot of it, and I'm aware of that.
Let's talk about the composition, how you sat down and composed for that. Did you have dancing first and foremost in mind, and what were you thinking of in terms of the function of the composition as it relates to the dancing?
Well, so I'm thinking very much about movement and dance. While I'm thinking that's got something to do with what I think of as a melody. So I'm aware of that. I approach it differently than I would if I were writing a composition that has nothing to do with dance. So yes, me writing for dance and movement definitely influences how I'm thinking about melodic invention. So for sure, that's right.
How did you conceive of the instruments that you would use, the orchestration?
Well, for Song of Song, for instance, I wanted to capture, since this is old Hebrew text, it's a story in the Old Testament of the Bible. Okay, so what I read the text. I read the song, the poem. I read the words that the story is about, the storyline. I tried to make sense out of that, which is pretty hard, actually. I did go back online and listen to old Hebrew music, on YouTube, and I listened to people performing old Hebrew music, and the instruments that they use. I got an idea of the scales that were being used. So I listened to that. So what my approach to that project was, I don't want to mirror image Hebrew music. I just want to take certain nuances from old ancient Hebrew music and mix it with jazz music. So this is my concept of how to approach this project, and I did it that way. So when I got ready to play original tunes and think of melodies, I'm thinking of dance. I'm also thinking about the particular emotion that's being expressed by the story at that point in time. If the emotion is about deep love that's not being satisfied, then, in other words, if the story at that point in the long story, that this music is going to capture that emotion for the words being said at this particular moment in the story, then I'm first of all I'm playing chords and thinking of melodies that sound like very, very, very almost sorrowful and wanting. I'm thinking of sounds that produce that kind of emotion, as if I'm writing for a movie score, and the actors are. So I'm doing that, and but I'm very much aware of still using some of parts of the scales, Middle Eastern scales that they used back then, and so I'm aware of that. And then I'm mixing that with jazz chords. I'm just doing all that at once. And so that's how I approached it.
When you're working with a choreographer, did you have to revise certain pieces because maybe the choreographer said...
Not too much. No. All I do is, here's what I do. I read the script to the story. I read the story. I understand the emotions that are going on between the two main people in the story. I understood it, at least to some degree. I just write tunes. If I want to, I think about the different emotions that all human beings feel. Extreme sadness, extreme joy, sensuality, mysticism, reverence. All these are different emotions that people feel. I just think about what emotion do I want to capture right now, and then I stay with that emotion and build a melody around that. Now, once I get through with the music, I take the music to the choreographer and say, this is how I hear this story musically. And then he just choreographs. Now, there might be certain things that might have to be addressed, but they're very small things. They're not structural. They're just maybe a tempo might be a little faster or a little slower.
And how long would it take to write each song?
Well, if I feel really inspired, it can be fast. It almost writes itself. I might think of a compelling melody within an hour or 45 minutes. Sometimes it's harder to get in the zone for the flow of ideas to happen for you, because so much of it depends on the mood you're in, if you're distracted by everyday life, noise, outside, dogs barking, whether or not you need to go pay the bills at the bank. I mean, so much of life is being lived, and you got to try to create music while just living normal life. Sometimes you don't always feel inspired, and ideas don't always flow easily, and sometimes they do. So when they do, it's easy. It almost writes itself. When things are not flowing, then this is where you need your craft. This is where craft and your knowledge of craft comes in, because then you almost write from that angle, and then maybe the flow starts.
And how did it feel at the performance?
Well, when I'm performing, we're performing on stage with the dancers as they are dancing. Because my job is to compose music, and because I'm dealing with jazz, I must have my compositions where there are areas in there that the improvising is going on, but I also must have things that are very organized and very set in stone, because the dancers are not improvising.
Oh, that's interesting. How does the choreographer say, wow, what do we do when you're improvising?
Well, yeah, because that's why that I must, in terms of structure and in terms of musical things that happen, certain things must happen at the same time all the time. And I must make a decision on what these things are and where they occur structurally within the composition. And then once that's set, then you got, this is where me as a composer, this is where I got to have, what would you say, like road, I'd have to have, it's like a highway with markings where the exit is here, and then you get off at this exit, and this is where that structurally within a particular composition, musically, I have to have these signposts, these markings that at pretty much to where drivers driving down the highway, and they know that, oh, I get off here. Then I have to musically have what that is. Oh, I have here I put my left foot down real hard. So I have to have that and have that in mind as I'm writing. And so that becomes the thing that's tricky when you're writing for a dance.
Now, real quick, talking about your performance at the Kennedy Center honoring your friend Stanley Crouch, great jazz journalist and great overall author. Could you talk about your relationship with Stanley Crouch?
Yeah, well, Stanley, I've known him for years. He's a wonderful writer. He's a real jazz aficionado, and he writes a column. He did write a column for one of the New York newspapers, and he does liner notes for music for people, and he writes books about music and jazz. I've known him a long time. He's always been in my corner. I think he's always had some kind of respect for me.
Yeah, he said some very, very kind words about you. And I think in the New York Times, there's praising you and your craft and your work.
Yeah, so he's always been very nice to me in that manner, and he's actually done some liner notes for records and CDs that I've done through the years. So this was honoring him. The thing at the Washington Kennedy Center, and so what we were doing, the tunes that were chosen, I wasn't the only artist involved in that. There were other people. David Murray was one of them. I was one of them. There were other people involved, and these people were doing tunes. Their own tunes that Stanley happened to write the liner notes for on records. So there were 2 or 3 of my originals that Stanley wrote the liner notes for on my records, and those were the tunes that were chosen. Not just my tune, but tunes I played on, because we played a Mingus composition.
This next segment, real quick, I do fun questions. You don't have to answer too seriously here. I'm going to ask you top 3 this, top 3 this, and whatever comes to your mind, let's just see what the answers are, okay? Okay, so I want to ask you, who are your top 3 trumpet players?
Top today?
Anytime,
just
anytime.
In general, anytime. Well, certainly Dizzy Gillespie. I would say Kenny Dorham, Clifford Brown.
Okay, how about top 3 bass players?
Top 3, I would say Ray Brown, Oscar Pettiford first. Oscar Pettiford, Ray Brown, Paul Chambers.
And how about top 3 drummers?
Let me see. Kenny Clark. Definitely. Let me see. Kenny Clark, Max Roach, maybe Roy Haynes.
Let's try top 3 tenor saxophone players.
Lester Young, John Coltrane. I would say maybe Sonny Rollins.
How about now alto players?
alto players, well, Kurt goes without saying, Charlie Parker, of course, Sonny Stitt, definitely Cannonball.
Now, this will be a fun one. Top 3 blues heads.
Oh, okay. Well, certainly, what would you call it? Parker's Mood. I mean, I think that's actually beautiful. So, let me see. Oh boy, there's so many blues.
So many blues.
Yeah, so many blueses. I mean, but that's one I would say is a great blues. Any blues that Louis Armstrong does, any blues at all. As that trumpet player, I got to go back and put Louis Armstrong.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, I mean, number one. I mean, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. Okay, and
2 more blues.
Blues. Yeah, the blues. I mean, there are blues singers that I like Big Joe Turner. I like him.
Okay, how about top 3 rhythm changes?
Yeah, I would say Anthropology. Shalnoff. Okay, and one more. Let me see, Anthropology, Shalnoff. Moose to Mooch.
Moose to Mooch. I didn't get to ask you pianists. Who are your top 3 pianists?
Oh, Bud Powell, Art Tatum. Let me see. Bud Powell, Art Tatum. Okay, Bud Powell, Art Tatum. There are other people, but you're limiting it to 3, so you end up... You know, when you do that, if you're limiting things to 3, you end up with people like the real. First of all, you almost end up with older people and almost like the innovators. So I'd say Bud, Art Tatum, and I don't know. I can't. Yeah, because I mean, I can think about a lot of players that I could mention. You know, I could Barry Harris or people like Bill Evans or Cedar Water, but I'm trying to. Well, okay, I'm gonna put one in there. Nat King Cole.
How about top 3 ballads?
Yeah, ballad. I would say "Embrace for You" as being one of them. I would say Duke Ellington, maybe "In a Sentimental Mood." Okay, and a ballad. What would be another ballad that's beautiful? Maybe "All Through the Night," maybe Cole Porter.
And now 3 non-ballads, just medium swing.
Medium tunes. Oh boy. Well, I mean, I like Dave Brubeck's "In Your Own Sweet Way," which is beautiful. Let me see. I like anything Bud Powell does. Bud Powell has a tune called "Dusk at Sandu" or something like that.
You've in fact at your concert at the 80th birthday, you ended with a song called "Bud Like" that you wrote. Yeah,
but it was kind of a blues. Yeah, it was a blues.
And you met him, right? You've met Bud Powell a few times, right? You mentioned in the last interview.
Yeah, I did meet Bud a couple of times. He sat in with Mingus once.
And you played Indiana.
Yeah, we played Indiana, and he was great. He was still having problems. Bud had problems mentally, and he was on meds. He was taking medicine.
I heard he was very difficult to talk to, right?
Yeah, it was very difficult. You couldn't really have a real conversation with him.
Yeah. What did Mingus think of Bud Powell, and did you ever talk?
Mingus knew Bud Powell was a genius. He knew it because he played with Bud, so he knew. So he had a lot of respect for Bud. I mean, Mingus didn't respect a lot of people, but he sure respected Bud Powell, and he really respected Charlie Parker, and he respected Duke Ellington, and I think he respected Monk. But he didn't have a lot of respect for a lot of people.
Yeah, but he liked you. He kept you. He must.
Well, he liked me. Yeah, but I'm so much younger. I'm in a whole different league. I'm a kid.
What's the hardest tune you've ever written?
Hardest tune I've ever written? Oh my goodness. Let me see. I would say Horizons. Maybe.
Oh, that's a great one. Also, hardest tune in the sense that you really had a tough time writing it.
A tough time writing. Now, that's different. Let me see. Let me see. A tough time writing it. Well, there was some ballet. Yeah. I can't. I had a tough. Yeah. Let me see. That's a whole different one because some stuff that's complicated, hard, I didn't have a tough time. Some stuff I did. I don't know if I could. I would say a tough time writing maybe Seventh Dimension.
And what was the easiest tune you've written? Like it just flowed so easily.
A Tear and a Smile, which is a ballad. Yeah, it was. I wrote it pretty easily. Yeah, it came. That was one of the tunes that flowed really, and also another tune that I wrote called the Manhattan Nocturne, also was flowed easily too.
Now, if somebody was listened to this interview and said, "Wow, Dr. McPherson, he's amazing," what 3 albums would you recommend they check out?
Illusions in Blue, From This Moment On, and Come Play With Me. And one more. I got one more that I would do. I would say Sakuya BB. That's with string, and it's dedicated to Billie Holiday. And
the final question would be like, if we had a time machine, you could go back in time and hang out with Charlie Parker, what would you ask him? Because I remember the last interview, you were talking about like something to do with the saxophone and the reeds. But now, with the great career that you've had, now you could meet him again. What would you ask him?
If I were to meet Charlie Parker, let me see. I guess I would ask him, do you? Let me see. Boy, it would be so many questions I would want to ask him. Yeah, I would. I'd probably want to ask him, what is he thinking when he's playing?
And is that like musically, like how he's improvising in his head?
Anything, whatever he's thinking. yeah, whatever it is. What is it?
Well, the great Dr. McPherson. I mean, you're such a master musician, and congratulations on your 80th birthday and that amazing concert. Congratulations on the new season at the San Diego Ballet for Song of Songs. I'm such a fan of yours, and I really hope to talk to you for the 3rd time because you really are a legend, and we're so lucky. Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. And I really do appreciate the interest. And thank you, and we will speak again. Yes, Dr. McPherson. Have a lovely rest of the day. Thank you now. Bye. All right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. See you.